Somehow, every Friday around 5 o'clock, I have the best question of the week about one of my holdings. And I know that an analyst would lose their mind if 5 o'clock I tell them, do you mind staying a bit longer? I have a question. But Tenzing Memo
100%.
is going to stay with me for the next 2 hours until I get to the bottom of it, and has unlimited memory bank, and all the memory is fresh. I think that's important, but we'll come back to it.
Yep.
What is it that I can do with Tenzing Memo that I can't do without it?
The aspects of Memo that I really like to emphasize are the long form research and analysis. And I think that's where we shine. I think, there are many people, especially in the financial services, rushing to implement AI in various aspects of their products and their workflows. And many are getting traction. I think the way in which we differentiate ourselves is in the quality and the rigor of our Q&A and in the detail and the nuance of our long form output. And Memo is really designed to do kind of 2 or 3 basic things really well, which is that long form research and analysis, to highlight kind of material company specific issues, and to be your collaborative thought partner through a chat window, the type of window that all of us have gotten used to with ChatGPT and other tools. Those are there are other features and functions that I think are interesting and arguably unique, but those are the 2 to 3 things that we really like to focus on. And we really take pride in doing that narrow set of functionality really well. What is unique and what helps us stand out is the quality, the recency, the accuracy, and ultimately like the small little details that kind of take time and attention to read. And I think that's kind of both for us a great opportunity. It's also a challenge for us as a business. I mean, in order to really appreciate the quality of the content, you kind of have to shut the door to your office and sit there like you would be reading a 10K and dig in and dial in. Not everyone wants to do that. Not everyone needs to do that. But I think that is where we shine.
Welcome to Talking Billions. We talk about big ideas, big inspirations, big topics. We take on the hardest topic of all, money. How to make it, save it, keep it. But our conversations lead us to an even bigger question, what it means to live a rich life beyond money. My guests share their practices, principles, and evergreen wisdom. I'm your host, Bogumil Baranowski, author, TEDx speaker, and investment advisor to wealth creators with patient capital and an infinite investment horizon. I work with families and individuals who aspire to grow wealth over a lifetime and generations through disciplined, thoughtful investments in durable quality businesses, while giving money meaning. Join me on this quest to unearth and share the wisdom of the ages. Let me share with you the podcast program disclosure statement. Blue Infinitas Capital LLC is a registered investment advisor, and the opinions expressed by the firm's employees and podcast guests on this show are their own and do not reflect the opinions of Blue Infinitas Capital. All the statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. The information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. The information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for any individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Past performance is not indicative of future performance. None of what you're about to hear is investment advice. My guest today is Nick Kapur, co-founder of Tenzing Memo, the AI-powered market intelligence platform. Nick is a product leader, former equity analyst specializing in investment research technology and asset management. He has extensive experience building AI-powered tools that enable investors to efficiently digest and understand complex company data. As co-founder of Tenzing Memo, he drives innovation in market intelligence platforms designed to accelerate the research process for long-term investors. Nick, how are you? So nice to see you again.
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Bogumil.
I've been really looking forward to this. As you know, I'm a big user of Tenzing Memo. For the benefit of the audience, you are a sponsor of quite a few episodes of this show. I was a big user before we even started talking about sponsorship. And a lot of people ask me about what I use. So I've been talking about your platform before. And now I've been sharing it more with guests, and it became part of many conversations on this podcast. AI is on people's minds. I think we're learning how to use it. You build something that can really give us almost superhuman powers in research, but we'll talk about it in a second. I want to ask about you, and you and I spoke a little bit, but I'm curious. Early days, childhood upbringing, and then there's a story about your dad and how you fell in love with stocks and stock investing. Can you share a bit more? I think it will set the stage beautifully for what Tenzing Memo is all about.
I'd be happy to. Thanks for having me. Thank you so much for the kind words and the support. I also should start by saying my partner, who's largely responsible for the concept and in my view, the quality of the product, Tom Saber-Agan, not here today, but very much in mind when I get any compliment on the service. I think first about Tom. To your question on my childhood, I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. My parents were both self-made bankers. They met in New York City in the 70s. You know, a woman working in banking in the 70s was a pretty novel thing. My mom's a very tough lady. And my dad came to the States on a athletic scholarship, became interested in business and finance and corporate America. And they ultimately settled down in Washington, D.C., working for the World Bank organization. And so I grew up in D.C. as like not in the political scene, but adjacent to the political scene, I think. As I got older, I was really interested in sports, very interested in games, loved video games, loved computer games. I have a lot of amazing memories of working on my dad's old 286 and 386 IBMs and kind of learning MS-DOS. And playing kind of a lot of games that were kind of journey based and logic based. And that love of games drew me inevitably to the markets, right? Mm-hmm. I think, the mix of competition and the love of games and the love of interacting with the game and rules and to a certain extent winning, those are really fun things that kind of, as I got older, it was the late 90s as I became a teen, and my dad was doing a lot of personal investing and stock investing. CNBC was on in the background all the time in the 90s. Almost as a way to bond with my dad, I started getting into it. It's like sometimes people meet you where you are, and sometimes you have to meet them where they are. And I kind of met my dad where he was in the markets. And as I went into college, I, initially resisted his suggestion that I study finance. I, was a pre-law major effectively, and realized pretty quickly, law was not what I was interested in. I kind of merged back towards investing and finance and, personal investing for sure. Got my first start back in Washington, D.C. as an analyst, and realized within a couple years after formal training that picking stocks was fun. I really liked that. Researching was fun. I really liked that. But actually kind of rationalizing an investment decision and defending it and arguing its, position or entry into a book with colleagues and professionals was not something I actually really enjoyed that much. But what did happen in parallel was I really loved the product and the business of investing. I really like I think it's underappreciated that there's an entire industry and business behind, the stuff that we do every day as individual investors. I think, it's easy to forget that this is an operating industry, and people should look at the business of investing like a business. And I really was drawn towards the client-facing aspects. I was really drawn towards the operations and the technology, and that kind of shaped my career as it evolved. And as I got older, and this was in 2009, a very significant personal event took place where my uncle, who was a very successful banker in his own right, founded a very significant retail bank, He was actually killed in a terrorist attack. And his encouragement to me when he was living, I told him I was studying law, and he kind of looked at me saying like, I don't really see you in law.
Mm,
Lawyers can only scale to a limited extent. Um, and he kind of looked at me and said, "You might be better for business." And when he passed away, it was, obviously very tragic circumstances. But that year, 2009, kind of caused a switch to flip in my head. Something that drew me much closer initially towards entrepreneurship at the company I was working for, and then soon thereafter, more pure entrepreneurship. And so, fast forward 15, 16 years, that seed took root. And I kind of combined the idea of, building businesses, building new products, building new services alongside with kind of a natural love of the markets and games.
mhm.
And so that's the story. That's the narrative.
It's fascinating how those early days shape us. How some of us fall in love with stock picking. I'm thinking I had on the show Aswaf Damodaran, who is the valuation guru, teaches at NYU. I got to meet him in person once or twice, and he told me, a lot of people are thinking about market outperformance. He says, after 50 years of doing this, he had so much fun just doing research that's
Yeah.
more than enough and forget the market. And I think some of us just love the research, and your tool allows us to really fall in love again with research at a level that maybe was not possible. And we'll talk more about it, and definitely was not possible for one individual to do with more stocks and go so deep. I'll mention one more thing that's been on my mind. I brought it up to you before we pressed record. I was listening to Michael Lewis' interview with Michael Burry, a big short story. And it was one thing that Michael Burry mentioned that really hit me, and I wanted to bring it up today, how few people are doing in-depth research these days. So Michael Burry mentioned how when he started, there were hedge funds, mutual funds, a lot of active managers actually looking at stocks. And now there's a huge participation of passive investing, for better or for worse. But I think for those of us that actually pay attention and do research, maybe there's a huge advantage, especially with the tools that became available. And I'll ask you in a second more about it. But
Yeah.
love research, stock analyst. And at some point you discovered that this new technology became available, and Tenzing Memo came about with Tom's, credit to Tom as well, of course.
Of course.
How did that come about? Tell me more, like the birth of the company.
I think it originated from a fundamental need of Tom, which was part of his investment process, which kind of evolved and took shape over a couple decades in a career that, started on the deep value side for him and then led to the large cap growth sphere of the investing world. And I think Tom's practice very much was to turn over a lot of rocks, and to look at new opportunities, which for him at the time entailed printing out a lot of documents. Well, chronologically, going to grab the documents, which is a major time suck for people. And I think a pain point to go and fetch all the relevant materials you need to look at when you're eyeballing a new company or considering it, and you need to do basic, initiating research on it. So going just and grabbing the information, collating it, printing it, making it available to yourself to read, that's a time-intensive process. And he wanted to do that on many companies. And I think he had a personal mandate for himself to cover a lot of ground. I think that process, that ambition doesn't scale more than there are hours available in the day to shut the door of your office and be to yourself for a couple hours. And how many times can you do that? And so I think that was kind of the starting point. That was the point of origination, was this need to want to create a consolidated qualitative look at a company, to be able to understand and deconstruct its narrative history, without having to do a lot of those process level steps that I just mentioned. How do you do that? You can do that when someone else has done it for you. And you can do that when there is a recent and reasonably in-depth initiation report coming from the sell side. Morningstar research, when coverage was more expansive and regular, I think, that served a good proxy for that narrative-based understanding of what a company does, how they got to where they are, what their competitive advantages. But a lot of these tools kind of haven't kept up with the times and haven't kept up with technology. And so, and this was in 2022. What he saw was the ability to utilize some of the nascent NLP tools coming from OpenAI, and specifically GTP2 and GTP3, which were rapidly improving to the point where he and I had an early conversation, and he said, I think we can probably string together an AI-like analyst to do a lot of these narrative tear sheets that we want to create for ourselves. And I think part of the rationale was the fact that he knew that I had pretty good product experience and technology experience. You know, part of my know-how and my ability is to hear a good idea and then put it into effect. And I think a lot of people have good ideas, but they kind of fall short on the execution and implementation side of things. And that's the part of it that I really like and I really enjoy is going from a dead cold start to something that actually works and can scale and, gets feedback. And, so we kind of kicked off from there. And, I won't meander on the answer, but that was the origin story.
There was a pain point, and then there was technology showing up that would allow you to approach it from a different angle. I'll ask more about that in a second, but I'm very curious about the name. For the benefit of the audience, tell me.
Tenzing Norgay was Sir Edmund Hillary's Sherpa on Mount Everest.
Yeah.
And I think without Tenzing, Hillary doesn't summit Everest. And, the analog to what we're talking about in the investing space and, the company analysis space is pretty straightforward from there. Once you know what Tenzing Norgay did and who he did it for, and the fact that his job was to assist the other person to help them achieve new heights and achieve new scale, new achievements, new thresholds. That's kind of where we see ourselves. We're not the guy. We like to view ourselves as the enabler of the guy, of the person doing the work. We want to help that person summit new heights.
Mm-hmm. I like that image because I see Tenzing Memo as this analyst with superhuman powers on one side, unlimited patience, and my questions never end. And Tenzing Memo doesn't mind, but a human does. I know that. I was both, on the receiving end of it when people were asking me questions about a stock I researched and me asking my interns and analysts questions at different points in time. Anyway, so for a minute,
Tenzing is your collaborative thought partner, just so you know. And
exactly,
Tenzing's your buddy that is ready to play at all hours. Not everyone wants to play thought games with you in the middle of the day. You're not always ready to have those conversations in the middle of the day. So this is a tool that enables you to do it whenever you want.
It's funny that you mentioned that because somehow every Friday around 5:00, I have the best question of the week about one of my holdings. And I know that an analyst would lose their mind if 5:00 I tell them, do you mind staying a bit longer? I have a question. But Tenzing Memo 100%. Is going to stay with me for the next 2 hours until I get to the bottom of it, and has unlimited memory bank, and all the memory is fresh. I think that's important, but we'll come back to it. Yep. What is it that I can do with Tenzing Memo that I can't do without it?
The aspects of Memo that I really like to emphasize are the long form research and analysis. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we shine. I think, there are many people, especially in the financial services, rushing to implement AI in various aspects of their products and their workflows. And many are getting traction. I think the way in which we differentiate ourselves is in the quality and the rigor of our Q&A, and in the detail and the nuance of our long form output. And Memo is really designed to do kind of 2 or 3 basic things really well, which is that long form research and analysis, to highlight kind of material company specific issues, and to be your collaborative thought partner through a chat window, the type of window that all of us have gotten used to with ChatGPT and other tools. those are there are other features and functions that I think are interesting and arguably unique, but
Hmm.
those are the 2 to 3 things that we really like to focus on. And we really take pride in doing that narrow set of functionality really well. But broadly speaking, you can go into Chat or you can go into Gemini and say, create a TAM for me on this company, or create a bull case on that company. That's not unique to us or anyone. What is unique and what helps us stand out is the quality, the recency, the accuracy, and ultimately like the small little details that kind of take time and attention to read. And I think that's kind of both for us a great opportunity. It's also a challenge for us as a business, meaning in order to really appreciate the quality of the content, you kind of have to shut the door to your office and sit there like you would be reading a 10K and dig in and dial in. Not everyone wants to do that. Not everyone needs to do that. But I think that is where we shine.
When I look at Tenzing Memo, I'm thinking about the inputs. And one of the features allows you to see all the documents that have been uploaded. On top of it, you can upload your own if some of them are missing, or if there are some that are your own work that can be included in the conversation. So that's very powerful because I see what's being sourced, right? When you use other tools, some of it might not be reliable resources or it might be just made up. But you show all the annual reports, you show transcripts from events, you can add to it. But there's a lot of public information that's out there, but it's already there. You put in a ticker, you see all the documents. Can you talk more about it? I think a lot of thought went into this. How do you source and what's in it? What goes into the pipeline?
Yeah. So first, and this is a very common question for us. First, none of our inputs are proprietary or unique.
Mm-hmm.
We're using completely off-the-shelf public domain information that anyone can get access to. And in that respect, that's, I think part of what is useful and I think universal about what we're doing is there's no like special data feed. There's no proprietary data source that helps us get a better output. And I think a really good analogy that is illustrative and visual and relevant to people is a restaurant. Meaning,
Mm-hmm.
if you look at the ingredients list in a mediocre restaurant and an exceptional restaurant of the same cuisine, the same type, those ingredients are going to be largely the same.
Mm-hmm.
For an Italian restaurant, it's going to be olive oil and tomatoes and, pasta and, maybe some proteins. Though the quality of the ingredients, just because and let's say you source equally good ingredients from the same farmer's market or the same, wholesaler, just because you use the same thing and bring the same thing into your kitchen does not guarantee you'll get the same output. And so I think what we like to think of ourselves is we're not trying to consolidate, non-public sources of input. That's the opposite of what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is make the best of what is totally out there in the public domain and available for everyone to look at. We think we squeeze more flavor out of those inputs than Claude does, or than ChatGPT does, or Perplexity. And we think and it's easy to tell, just like you can taste a better cheeseburger or a better bowl of spaghetti, you can generally, if you know what you're looking for, you can taste a better TAM or a better bull case.
All the documents go in, and then there are at least two ways to interact with it. One is a template of questions or topics or themes, right? The story, the bull case, the bear case, the edge, the risks, the positioning, and so on. I almost remember the list by heart, so it tells you how much I use it.
I love it.
And you can pick a ticker that you can pick a company that you haven't looked at. I learned a lot, as I told you early on, both about companies that I've owned for a long time, new things, and companies I've been looking at recently. Anyways, can you walk us through? So there's a list of templates. What's behind? We see the outcome, this beautiful story told of a company based on all the documents, all the public information, how it came about, and the founder's story, and on and on and on. What's the secret behind it, as much as you can share, how those outputs end up on the page visible to us?
Yeah, I think I would point to two things. I think our approach to data architecture and data cleanliness is unique. Even in a single document, there's a lot of noise. And even stuff that looks non-noisy might be noise, especially in a specific query or when you're trying to isolate in on a certain facet of a conversation or a research process. Um, the idea, even today with more advanced models available, the idea that you can throw in entire documents and squeeze out a high quality, noiseless output, I think is not correct. And our testing, I think, indicates that. So part of it is what you do with that information. And then the next phase of it is what you are asking the AI to do with it. And meaning, so, the prompting strategy and the process associated with, which documents do you reference or which chunks of documents do you reference in which instance? How do you balance it with news feeds? How do you balance it with fundamental data? That's not easy to do. And I think what's easy to do is to get generic results. And I think that's where, the devil is in the details, is setting up the system or even dropping a folder of documents into Google LM. How hard is it to do that? It's a couple minutes worth of time and effort generally, if you know what you're doing. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a high quality output from it. And I think in this business, there are easy ways to do things at a mid level, and they're straightforward and they're quick and they're often very cheap. What's harder to do is to do things really well and to do them systematically well, which is, I think, a level that we're hitting or trying to hit. So the secret, I can't give you a definitive answer on the secret sauce. I think it comes down to how we approach the architecture of our information, as well as what we tell the AI to do with that information once it's organized and databased.
The output, if I can add a few words, looks like a very well-written report by an analyst that understands the business, has been around this business for a while, and has given a lot of thought in trying to explain the business to somebody that might not be familiar with it, which is the first ask any analyst has. I think a lot of analysts, including myself, at different points in time, we fall short because there's so much information about any single business. But here, you can have a tool that will actually skim through years of history, years of data, years of transcripts, and give you the most, accurate, complete picture. So these are the templates that people can see and then refresh every now and then, which I do. I actually am on a mission to refresh all my core holdings and go through them all over again and see what I can find out in terms of, adding or maybe trimming some of the positions. The other part of the interface, which I really love, is this open-ended conversation that you can have with your superhuman analyst about all the content that's in the system. And, you can ask about earnings calls or earnings releases. I do that. But then you can ask about anything that's on your mind. And just as an example, I have a memory of Colgate, not a recommendation of any kind, but reporting write-offs of their Venezuelan operations, big write-offs years ago. And I wanted to find it. And you know what I did? I uploaded some of the documents from that period into Tenzing. And Tenzing found footnotes all about those write-offs that I remember reading years ago. But it was a fading memory. And Tenzing Memo brought it back to me with the years and the quotes and the numbers in a nice answer, which made me feel like I remember it, but I'm glad I could double check it, which I would do with a human and give them a week-long assignment to look it up, and they would probably not love me for it. Memo doesn't care, produces the answer. I want to ask you about something that I really like, and I think this audience would appreciate. At some point, you feel like, I think I ran out of questions about this stock, and you give a suggestion, well, the chat window does, of another question that I have to tell you adds a lot of value. It's almost like an analyst that not only is not tired of me asking questions, but says, you know what, you haven't asked yet about this. And I'm thinking, I should have. Can you, as much as you can share about this, because I think it's yet one more benefit of working with Memo, that additional question.
Absolutely. So, we think our goal is to make Memo as analyst-like as possible, and not in a gimmicky way, but in a what does the best analyst in your firm actually do? What does he or she contribute to a conversation or a meeting? What role do they play in the workspace and, on the idea level? And in our view, part of it, we kind of look at it as almost like a T-shaped process, meaning, at first it's to be able to cover a lot of horizontal ground. And then when you find something that's interesting, that sparks your curiosity, it's about going down and deep. And part of that process is to have someone nearby who can propose ways not just to, completely change the conversation, because that can be actually counterproductive, but to create and open those rabbit holes, and to pull at the threads of the sweater that might actually lead you to, and these, in your words, learning something about a company that you've been studying for years that you didn't already know. And I think the only way to do that is to have that sidekick, to have that Tenzing Norgay behind you saying, keep going up. There'll be good stuff ahead if you keep drilling into this. And those suggested questions, which now exist, both on top of the chat, but also have been built into the chat itself, I think really promote healthy and actionable dialogue that, again, you're talking to AI, and, some people might question the utility and the actionability of that, but so you're not alone in your perspective, that people have advanced their thinking just by what Tenzing is suggesting to do next within the workflow. And I think it's for the user's benefit. Tenzing doesn't benefit. So it's the collaborative aspect of the Q&A, I think, is phenomenal. It's definitely, when we look at who the contributors are on the firm level, the people who are listening to on the investment committee, who are asking tough questions or saying, do you think about this, or did you take it this way? That's a big value add in a team environment. So we're trying to virtualize that.
I have memories of being in a meeting with the management of a company, and I've been in so many, but I always remember that it was worthwhile to stay after the meeting, and some other questions would pop up. Maybe somebody was saving that question. Maybe they thought about it. But if you lingered the extra 5 minutes, those 5 minutes were worth more than the prior 60 minutes or an hour and a half in that meeting. Because everything else, it's what everybody knows. They're making these widgets at that price for that market. Everybody knows that. But then at the end, this one or two questions would pop in, and it was about a pricing strategy, about some cost efficiency, or about a new product launch. And it was all public, but somehow the conversation was focused on things that everybody knew. And if you stayed the extra minute, you could hear something that was worthwhile. And I feel like that experience that we're talking about right now, to me, is that the extra few minutes when almost everybody left the room, the CEO is still there, and this one overeager analyst that was sitting next to me has one more question. And I feel like, he has a point. Let me explore it. So that's how I see it. There's so many.
I might steal that from you, that visual from you, if you don't mind, by the way.
Please do. And I have any advice for anybody researching stocks. Like there's the 90% that everybody knows, but you and I know, and I think many members of this audience know, that it's the remaining 5-10% that make the difference. And how do we get to that?
Always.
When you're reading an annual report, I think there's a certain, mental exhaustion after reading these pages, right? So the last few pages or some of those things just like merge and fade away. With Memo, I can go back to something and get it back with complete freshness and no exhaustion of a human mind. Yet again, let me ask about it again, and Memo will do that. A human being will get tired of you asking that. So it's more than a human can deliver. It's a tool that can really allow us to go deeper. I see it as a chance, and I mentioned it to you, kind of zoom out, zoom in, the T that you described. I can't memorize 10 years worth of annual reports. I can't do that. But I can find an annual report or a transcript where there was something mentioned that will change how I feel about the stock. And I think Memo allows me to go there in the quickest time possible and pull up that moment, and I ask, what did the CEO say exactly? And Memo will give you the quote. And you're like,
Yeah.
huh, okay. And did he mention that before? And Memo will find where it was mentioned before. Anyways, it's for the user to take advantage of, but it's a very powerful way of, exploring the content.
I was speaking with one of our clients yesterday, and I stole this phrase from him, and I will attribute him happily for it. But he referred to it, Tenzing, as the hot knife through butter, meaning, when you're trying to pull everything out and get to the fruit, Memo can really help you slice through and get right to it. And I love that image a lot. I'm definitely going to use that one.
I like that too. I want to highlight something because I think when we're interacting with AI, and I've been investing professionally for over 20 years, and I've seen a lot of innovation, and I mentioned it to you before, how there's a certain acceleration that I see, and I think it can be misunderstood. And I think you pointed out some of the misunderstandings people can have. And I like the restaurant story about the ingredients. But one of them is that AI will tell you which stocks to buy. And I really want to talk about it for a minute because the human judgment is still needed. And I like the idea of, Tenzing Norgay, who was helping somebody to climb the mountain. And here, somebody's helping you climb the mountain, but you are the one actually climbing. And I want to highlight that you are still needed. You, the investor, you, the analyst, you, the portfolio manager. So whatever tool you're using, it's, in my mind, not replacing you, but giving you a superpower. And I don't know what that's the best way to capture it, but I want to highlight that you get a superpower, but you're not replaced. Human judgment is needed. Do you have some thoughts about it?
I mean, I think it's critical. I think it's necessary. I think, and it's hard to say and opine on what AI will look like in 5, 10, 20 years. I think things might advance and get even more sophisticated. It seems likely. But in the present, I think it's absolutely necessary. I think, it's not a substitute for learning. It's not a substitute for real world experience. I think what AI is, in most instances, is a tool of augmentation, meaning whatever you are, it's going to make it more than that. If you're a lousy investor, it's going to make you a more lousy investor. If you're a middling investor, it'll make you even more mediocre than you already are. And if you're a great investor, it's going to help you get even greater. And I think that squares up with what I've seen. And and this is for many reasons why we, try and socialize AI with, folks in graduate schools and MBA programs, is we think these are tools to get comfortable with because they're not going anywhere. They will be part of the investment process. They enable a lot of workflow productivity. They can help you turn over rocks faster. That was our intent on day one, and it definitely does do that. And so, it is not going to take someone being a poor investor and turn them into a great one. I don't think that is an expectation that anyone should have of AI, at least not today. But it does help good people and serious learners get even better.
I like that. It can make you even better if you're already good at it. And I mean, to me, it's, years of experience asking questions. Here, I can just ask those questions and get the answers now instead of,
the feedback loop is compressing, which helps smart people get smarter faster.
There you go. And I think it's just incredible. It was humanly impossible to get the answer that quick before because somebody had to cross-reference so many documents and do so much reading. And here you can get the answer very quickly and dive in and see the source and details as much as you want. Nick, I'm curious about the audience listening, and I've interacted, as you know, with many of the listeners over the years, and it's a wide spectrum from people that do it themselves, incredible investors that manage just their own money, sometimes very substantial money, but they're doing real research at home. I talk to them on Zoom, and they live all over the world, and I have a lot of admiration for them, all the way to professional investors that are managing, funds, and they're investment advisors for individuals and families and institutions. So a wide range of people. I kind of know the answer, but I want to hear it from you. Who you think would benefit from having Memo in their pocket?
I will start by saying who I don't think seems to appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
The individual, the professional, and this is often true in the pod shops, especially the ones who are hyper focused on a small set of names, call
Yeah.
it 5 to 10 names, and that's all they trade. That's all they look at. Whether it's true or not, those people, their perspective is that they don't have anything to learn from a tool that summarizes, even in real time, what's in the public domain. Those
Mm-hmm.
people seem to gravitate towards unique proprietary insights that no one else gets, the exclusivity associated with something that's extremely expensive and no one else can look at. And I think those people, right or wrong, they consider themselves to be the foremost expert on a name or a trade or a strategy. And we have not had success trying to convince that person why they can still use and benefit from Memo.
Mm-hmm.
So once you stand back from that, the investors that I think do find a lot of utility kind of fit a couple of archetypes. I think on the fund side, especially boutique managers who don't have expansive teams and lots of resources and all the latest and greatest tools and excessive budgets at their disposal, they need extra help looking at names. They're already likely overwhelmed with their coverage list. They're
Mm-hmm.
likely already overwhelmed with fresh ideas that get pitched at them at good conferences or friends and idea dinners and things like that. What they don't have is the ability to parse the information in an accelerated manner. And they have good ideas stacking up on their desk and not enough time in the day to go through them. I think that person is highly benefited from what we can help them do, which on a certain level is toss more of those ideas into the garbage faster. And then on a certain level is double down on the ones that are really interesting to them. I think there are other archetypes of clients who find us really useful, those who are kind of serious and rigorous students of business and who really like to get into the nitty gritty of the detail. Obviously, we're a vector to get to the nitty gritty and we help enable that workflow. Opportunistic investors who might spend the past year or 2 years looking at a certain theme or motif, and then something happens in the news, and then their team decides, okay, we were looking at this, but now this has come along, and now we're going to look at that. And whatever knowledge you've been accumulating in the recent past suddenly is less relevant and useful, and you find yourself in a kind of informational and contextual desert where you need to kind of refresh yourself really quickly. And so, kind of opportunistic or special situations investors, distressed investors who look at completely different companies all the time and know nothing. How do they kind of jump up that learning curve? I think we're good for them. And then I think, on the financial advisor and wealth management side, another good archetype in our client base are those who inherit a lot of coverage and responsibility on names that they didn't pick. They were brought in by, a client whose father or family member passed away, and suddenly they own a lot of stock in a company that they know nothing about, and they're looking to their fiduciary to help guide them, and that fiduciary may not have any expertise in it, so that person needs to study up really quickly. And I think that's another archetype that finds us very useful. There are other corporate and maybe consultative types of users of Memo, but we do focus on the investment professional, and those are the types of investment professionals I think really find us relevant.
In my mind, anybody that loves research and we all have limited time, can benefit from it across the spectrum, even if you're investing on your own. And I know people that spend a lot of time reading. This can really speed up your process. There are two things I want to mention. I was thinking about blind spots, and it dawned on me that blind spots are not static, that they're actually dynamic and they're changing. So even if you've held a company, and you might know well that I've held some of my positions for more than 10 years for some clients, what I discovered is that there are new blind spots for those businesses, even that I think I know, because those businesses have changed. They're in new markets. They have a product line or two that they didn't have when I bought the stock. So although I'm keeping up, there's so much change that I have to it's a very humbling experience to realize I can't physically keep up with all of it. I need superpower here. And the second part to it is, when I do research, I kind of flip it on its head, because I try to talk myself out of buying a stock. I'm trying to find reasons not to buy it, which is a fun exercise. And when I can't talk myself out of buying it, I think I've tested the idea enough so it belongs, it deserves to be in the portfolio. But what happens next when you buy a stock is you're talking yourself out of selling it, because there's a million reasons to sell it. A couple of poor quarters. There's a new competitor that's doing a better job. Pricing is not the same. Maybe it's the recession. I mean, there's an endless list, tariffs, whatever. So Memo, the depth of research that you can do, I think gives you a chance to maintain the conviction to hold on to a stock. And I have a very, very strong belief that there are a lot of people, maybe even listening to this show, that bought the right stocks at the right time, even at the right price. But I think if you're very honest about it, a lot of those you haven't held long enough. I'm as guilty as anybody else. So if you have a tool, a helper, that can allow you to keep up, maintain this conviction to hold an idea, it has a huge value, at least to me. So I'll add it. I'm curious if you have thoughts about it.
I mean, I find that really interesting. I've not heard that before. I love it. And I would say, no matter where you are in the chronology or the spectrum of a position, who doesn't need an informed devil's advocate at all times?
Yeah.
No matter where you are in that state, it's useful to have someone to say, am I missing something? Or is this, where are we right now? Just to get a pulse check. I think I find it hard to believe that you can't implement that and find that useful, no matter pre-purchase, post-purchase, mature purchase. It's all of those things.
It's interesting that you mentioned, because I had a conversation with a handful of fellow investors about the benefit of having a devil's advocate. And at different points in time, I include myself, but I know others that try to have somebody in their career, in their life, even at their firm, that does it. It's a very hard job to do. It's not as exciting to do that.
Well, yeah.
But Memo can do it for you. There is a skeptic built into it, and we'll talk about it in a second, but there is a way to have somebody take the other side and show you what can go wrong. I think it's very refreshing. It's a reminder that, with the rewards, there are risks. What are the risks? Do I want to underwrite them?
I would say within a team environment, how difficult would it be to be the persistent antagonist? You would have to have a maximum level of political and social capital to still be well liked, and yet to torpedo everyone else's ideas. And yet AI, this is a perfect use case and role for AI to play, is that devil's advocate, because there are no hard feelings. The AI says what it is. If you don't take it seriously, that's your choice. You can dismiss its perspective, but you're not hurting anyone's feelings by getting it. And thank goodness for that.
Nick, I think it's a good moment for us to look at Memo together, and we'll do it in a way that's inviting for both those watching and those listening. So we'll walk everybody through what will they see when they experience the platform. And then, there's a free trial, details in the notes of the episode. There's a code included, an extended trial that people can use, no strings attached. 5 stocks that they can research, correct me if I'm wrong, and learn more about it and see how it works for their own benefit. But if we can switch on the visual for those watching, let's see what it looks like, and you can walk us through it so those listening can imagine what it's like until they get home and try the code at home.
Well, I will start at the top, which is, once you're into the system, we structure we're generous with free trials. We want people to use the system. We want people to look. And we allow people to unlock a certain number of tickers for a certain period of time during that trial. And you can go as deep as you like, meaning, I've pulled up Airbnb here. You can free to pull up whichever name that you find interesting. We cover about 5,500 stocks currently, everything on the NYSE and the NASDAQ above the penny stock level. And that's about to expand soon enough. So you have a wide breadth of names available to you, including a bunch of ADRs. And during the course of your trial, we want you to take a look at everything we have. And, I'm kind of mousing over these topical sections that are available on every single name that we cover. I'm mousing over, currently highlighting some of these company specific items that are unique and material to each and every company. And our AI is, scanning a lot of news, a lot of filings, and will highlight what it thinks are the big issues for any given company, whether it's covered by the media, whether it's covered by the sell side, doesn't matter. And what we want people to do in this period of time, during their trial, which is, at the minimum a couple of weeks, is go deep, consume as much information as you can, and then revisit, come back. Because as you say, there are constraints in life, there are constraints in your ability to think deeply. And there is a constant flow of new information that comes through. So, I've pulled up Airbnb. This is the version of it as it stands today. I'll click into some of these sections so you can see this is an executive summary, annotated, nicely and neatly organized. It can be downloaded to Word. It can be downloaded to PDF. You can ask questions about it here. You can do a lot of different things. You can jump in to the footnotes and go to the primary documents. It's all right here. But what's important is if and when a material event occurs during the course of your trial or just in general, all this information is going to update. It's all going to change. It's all going to refresh. I'll pull up a section that I haven't looked at and just give you a sense of our processing time and speed. So this is, this bear case on Airbnb is being fabricated in real time using all the latest inputs from the news, all the latest fundamentals, all the latest filings, et cetera. And then it's going to be written out right here. That's not a static concept. A really good sell-side initiation report that you can get within the past 1 month or 6 months is great. But not every company is covered. Not every company is covered recently. And so there's a lot of gaps, both in terms of coverage, but also recency coming from the sell side, coming from the independent research universe that I think a lot of investors could benefit from eliminating or reducing. And we can do that. So this bear case on Airbnb just wrote out. You can get a good high level sense of the half dozen or so issues that it flags. And then we want you to start a dialogue. So in other words, we're going to suggest these questions, which you mentioned earlier, in gold. And I'll kind of show you what our output looks like for Q&A. And then we can kind of dig into that quickly. But we kind of view, again, in the work and the analytical process in this T-shaped fashion. We say, start high. We're going to give you, a couple talking points really quickly on every company. So when you first look at a company, we're going to show you a one sentence elevator pitch kind of thing. We're going to show you a 2 bullet point, synopsis of what's going on, latest and greatest with the company. And then we expect that's the top of the T. And we want, to start you at a high general, but still useful level. And then we think, let's give you an executive summary. Let's show you what we think are, this is your one pager. This is your tear sheet on Airbnb, where if you've read nothing before on Airbnb, you'd know zero. We think we're going to take you up to working conversational knowledge with just this section alone. And we can jump you off and route you to articles and things like that. But then you're going to move maybe horizontally from there and say, well, what I'm really curious about? I really want to know more about the people at Airbnb, the executives. I want a really good biography on the key executives in the company. Good bios on executives, not so easy to get, especially once you get outside of, call it the top 1,000, top 2,000 companies out there. When you're in microcap or small cap land, a good bio on management that isn't just straight pulled from the 10K is hard to get. And we can do that. And again, help you go a little bit more vertical. And then anytime you have a question that you think is relevant, is interesting, you could just jump in on the right side and keep it in parallel. So I think, there's a lot of functionality here. There's a lot of bells and whistles and tools and features and functions that I really like that, I think we're really proud of the UI, and we think, doesn't take much training to learn here. But the big point is, start high level. You're looking at a new name. You're rusty on an old one. You say, hey, just get me going again. Let's get this ball rolling again so I can think more critically about the situation. That's where we'll start you. And then no matter what you're doing, no matter what you need, we'll take you deeper down into any topic and then ultimately into any kind of minutia that you want to get into on a micro level through the Q&A.
So for those of listeners that will go home and use the code and look it up and see it for themselves, there are 3 parts to it, right? So there you have the first narrow column that has the ticker, the chart, a couple of financials, the market cap, 52-week price range, and some other, financials mentioned.
And I'll pull up those documents that you mentioned earlier. These are all of our inputs that we're pulling in here on a document level. And this goes back a couple years. It's everything in Edgar that matters, not everything. It's the calls, it's the glossies from the IR website, it's the transcripts from roadshows. So, this is Airbnb's transcript to the Goldman Sachs Commucopia Technology Conference transcript. It's all right here and consolidated in a single place. So you don't have to go to 20 different websites to just get yourself started.
I like that nothing, falls between the cracks, because we all download those documents, and we used to actually have them mailed to our offices. I'm not going to mention how long I've been doing this. But here you can look at it. It's all in one place, and you can see what's included before you get the output. And then we mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again. You can add your own documents. If you see some annual reports that are maybe older, or maybe other documents that you wrote up from your own meeting with the management, and on and on and on, you can add it to the upload. You
just drop it in right here.
And it becomes...
And what that does is it individualizes and personalizes the interaction. Meaning, if you have entitled transcripts, expert transcripts, independent research, sell-side research, and you're entitled to use it, you can drop it in here and create an individual lens and conversation with Tenzing that, goes beyond and is private to you. We start you off with a good baseline, and we think the product is readily usable with all of these public inputs. But we also acknowledge people like and find a lot of value and utility in kind of unique premium sources of information, and so we create that vector too, obviously.
So for those of us that are not watching, I would mention the sections. So you briefly mentioned, but you have the briefing, the story, the people, the governance, product, valuation, bull case, bear case, for anybody to explore. But the way I look at it is, if you wanted to have a full comprehensive write-up of a business to actually understand it, that's all you might want to ask for to start with. And then you can explore the questions section on the right for those that will check it at home. And you can interact with the data. What I love about it is that the research I've interacted with, third-party research over the years, is that it's biased in some way, especially if it's sell-side, right? It's, driven by everybody wants commissions. And here there's both sides, bull case, bear case. There's just an honest write-up of what the business is. And we went back to the human judgment. You decide if what you've heard convinced you to buy or not the stock, which leaves, all the power with you. But you have a huge head start in terms of research. And I like that you highlighted that you can go in and see, where does this information come from? This annual report, this analyst meeting, whatever it was, and interact with it. I'll highlight one more thing that I forgot about, but I think this audience will benefit from. You can save your own questions. And I have some questions that I like to use for specific companies or for all of them. And you're showing it for the audience that's watching, save questions. You can have an unlimited number, I imagine, of questions that you like to use around.
These are some of the ones that I like to use over and over again. And so I've cached them. But yes, I mean, the idea is, it's typical for an analyst and for an investment professional to want to ask the same question of every company. And so we want to, if you have a long string, a prompt that you find to be really useful in other areas, bring that to us and run that on our system and see how those outputs compare head to head against whatever system you're using. We think we generally come out favorably in that type of setup.
I would add that if you ask a question, whether you're asking about the last earnings, quarterly earnings, or the last 3 of them, what the system does beyond the suggested question that you mentioned, it also suggests a follow-up question to your own question. So it's kind of and you can do it many times over. So you have this analyst that not only spent the time to write it up for you and answer your question, but the analyst says, would you like to have it compared this way? Would you like to have it in a table? Would you like to have it? And it adds it's a brainstorm session as much as it is a research session, where somebody else says, you asked this, Would you like another angle? And I value it hugely because it's like having, a couple of analysts in the room that have the audacity to add to the conversation, which I think you and I would agree that in some settings, a younger analyst would remain silent to keep their job. And here,
Totally.
Memo volunteers additional questions and creates even more work for itself, which is something that humans tend not to do. So that's a huge benefit that I think.
It's that classic yes and from
Yes,
improv,
and
comedy
yes.
improv. You always want to keep it going, but not just in a mindless way. It needs to be additive and hopefully continue a useful and productive chain of thinking.
And through this process, I realized that I find a new question because of those suggestions that I add to my repertoire of questions for the future, right? So you're learning to learn and you learn how
Yes.
to use it in more ways.
And I think what is interesting about that is, the underlying models here continue to get better and more sophisticated, meaning we don't write and structure and design LLMs. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and we
Mm-hmm.
mix and curate what we view to be the right combination and blend of LLMs for every task and every subtask. And there are lots, and in each one of these prompts, there are many, many subtasks. Um, and and so what that means in the Q&A side, and to the remark that you just made, Memo's ability to get better and do things continue to advance. And so the product just gets better at a fairly natural rate, or not, maybe it's unnatural actually, but it is its ability to kind of render out aspects of the analyst workflow and kind of just kick in with relevant suggestions as you suggest. It's getting
Mm-hmm.
better and better and better. And so it's one of the most amazing things in that regard. As a software guy, as a product guy, you wake up one day, you've upgraded the API, and you don't necessarily expect a certain part of the tool to get better, and
Yeah.
yet it's gotten much better, and it's remarkable.
Open-ended, always learning, always better. One last question I have for you to close it out about the future. How much you can share about maybe new features? Some features just came about. I think one of them is estimates. Maybe you can share more. Is there anything else that you can share that we could get excited about, as many of us will jump in when we
Yeah.
get home and try this?
So we keep a beta features part of the site where we showcase and preview some of the new functionality that isn't maybe quite totally finished but is ready for exploration. And in this case, we've got two here: an estimates reconciliation kind of comparison against what the AI thinks of the Wall Street consensus, as well as something called the five surprises, which is items that Tenzing thinks could happen that are underappreciated or not currently priced in. And that's a really fun and interesting one that is gaining a lot of popularity really quickly. We just released this, which was the ability to export every single piece of content in mass
Mm-hmm.
into a single PDF and then send it to your email, because we acknowledge not everyone wants to sit at their computer all day long and might have a flight, might want to, take a cozy chair by the fire and do some reading. We're trying to add a lot of power to the mobility aspect of the tool.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then coming up soon, and I kind of teased this a couple of minutes ago, but currently we cover everything on the NYSE and the NASDAQ, at least above the penny stock level. Soon we will add global coverage,
Wow.
meaning in the next couple weeks, maybe next month or two, potentially this year even, we'll onboard our first non-US major exchange, and add a couple hundred, if not a couple thousand new tickers to our coverage set, which I think
Mm-hmm.
it's the number one requested item from our clients these days is more coverage, especially on the international side. So we will do that. We are very much customer led in terms of our product strategy and decision making. Other tools and features that we'll dig into pertain to kind of more top of funnel, helping people find new names and threads to look at. So right now we do a little bit of that, and a little bit of, hey, did you look at this? You might find this interesting. More of that will come, and there'll be more kind of news wrangling, meaning We send out a daily email that is highly personalized that I think is like a very good and version of Google News Alerts, like the Google News Alert that you always wanted. I think we're pretty close to getting. We're going to productize functionality behind that, meaning, people have a need to look at concepts not just on a company level, but perhaps on a motif or secular basis. And so we're moving in that direction.
Amazing. I'm very excited about the international coverage and all the new features that are coming out. I like the report that you mentioned, that you can select all the sections that we talked about, the briefing story, bear case, bull case, and have it sent to you as an email. I've been also enjoying those regular emails that are personalized based on my coverage, that pull the relevant information. And it's such a massive head start, a regular head start on all the holdings, new things that came up. It's a very smart, thoughtful way of writing up what's new with the companies that you might know very well, but maybe you missed something new that came out.
Thank you.
Nick.
Get up to speed faster is our tagline.
And when I say faster, it's a whole different, it's exponential. It's not 10% faster. It's absolutely exponential what you can do. At the end of the day, it takes time for the stocks to perform. But if you can look at more ideas, look at them deeper and give it more thought, there's no way that you won't improve your research process. I can already see it with my own example.
Thrilled to hear that.
For the benefit of the audience, look up Tenzing Memo. The code is billions, and it includes an extended trial and 10% off. Try it, no strings attached. Play with a few tickers that are on your mind, stocks that you own, stocks that you wish you owned. Do some research and have some fun with it. I like the fireplace idea. Sit down with a report and do some reading.
Wherever you like to read, we want to meet you there.
Exactly. Nick, thank you so much. What a wonderful conversation. Highly recommend for this audience to try it and have fun with it.
Thank you so much for having me. Keep up the great work, and congrats on the huge milestone with your episode repertoire library. You're doing great work, and I love so many of your guests. I have personal connection to or know a good number of them. You've got a great group of people coming through. So congrats.
Thank you. I'm very excited about the guests that are coming up, and you'll recognize some of the names. I'm 100% sure. Incredible individuals doing incredible work, and I hope all of them will use Tenzing Memo. But anyways, thank you for today.
Good luck. Thank you so much, Bogmil.
You were listening to Talking Billions. We talk about big ideas, big inspirations, big topics. We take on the hardest subject of all, money. But our conversations lead us to an even bigger question: what it means to live a rich life beyond money. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment and follow, subscribe, rate, and share with friends and family. We rely on word of mouth to promote the show. One click for you means the world to us. Thank you. Until next time, your host, Bogumil Baranowski.